Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who is with us today. My name is Mark Freeman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Integrated Transitions. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this 30-minute event, which marks the first of a year-long series of events and initiatives exploring peace-building innovations in our Institute's global and local work as we mark the occasion of our 10th anniversary. And today's session is on the subject of locally led peace building, and it focuses in particular on our Institute's country brain trust model. And I'm very pleased to be joined for this conversation by three remarkable colleagues, Professor Margarita López Maya, a Venezuelan academic who's a leading political scientist and historian in Latin America, and a member of IFIT's Venezuela Brain Trust called the GEB, Grupo Experto para Venezuela in Spanish. We also have with us Mr. Chom Bagu, a well-known Nigerian development and peace-building expert who specialized in conflict resolution in Nigeria, and he's a member of our Middle Belt Brain Trust in Nigeria. And finally, we have Ms. Sawsan Abou Zainedin, a Syrian architect, urban development planner, and researcher who's focused on Syria's conflict and recovery. And she's a member of IFIT's Syria Brain Trust, which is called the Syria Resource Group. But before I turn to them and allow you a chance to hear from them, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to explain what the IFIT Brain Trust model is. And maybe to begin, I should point out that the expression brain trust is actually not something that IFIT invented. It was originally used in US politics nearly a century ago, but it basically describes the idea of a purpose-built group of thought leaders or academics who are brought together and who are appreciated for their technical expertise and political advice. And the underlying idea, if you like, is that more brains is better than one, when it concerns very complex policy issues. And so at IFIT, we took that basic idea and we applied it to our approach to in-country work. So a typical IFIT brain trust it's basically a multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral group of 15 to 18 social, business, and political leaders from the particular country. And they're chosen for their policy expertise, their personal integrity, their influential local networks, and also their capacity to connect elites and ordinary citizens. So, for example, a single brain trust might include the president of an important national university, the head of the National Business Council, might include one of the country's important religious leaders, or a director of a top local think tank, and so on. So again, the question is, why this category of leaders? Why do we focus on this in our brain trust model? And it has to do with, again, a concept that we've adapted from practice and from literature, which is the idea that there's people who lead from the middle. Again, it's a term first coined by Joseph Nye. It was actually developed further by our own colleague, Phil Clark. And the basic idea is that there are people who lead, whose main concern is with, let's say, relational dynamics across the political system. They're people who have influence upwards to national decision makers, downwards to community leaders, and you could say sideways to colleagues in institutions that play some kind of similar role or function. So what are the benefits of a brain trust? Again, you could imagine they vary from case to case, but I would say that above all, the brain trusts offer a very unique locally led platform to both understand the complexity of crisis and conflict countries where they operate, extraordinary levels of complexity, to develop creative and realistic local strategies that aren't, let's say, narrowly filtered through just one ideology or just one set of interests, because they're so multidisciplinary and so multi-sectoral in their composition. Brain trusts, of course, also bring together these key actors who, if we didn't have the brain trust, wouldn't necessarily meet as regularly. They wouldn't have a space that's useful for them, but that can also generate these very creative and realistic proposals, often on collective action problems that might otherwise be very hard to solve. And of course, they would just offer real-time analysis and advice, again, to decision makers, but also to others acting at a more community or more localized level. And so today, IFIT has 10 locally led country brain trusts. And as you can see, I mean, we have 3 of them represented here today. So with that, what I'm going to do is first turn to you, Margarita, and just invite you to tell us, in terms of the Venezuelan brain trust, just what is its overarching strategic goal in the incredibly complex country that is Venezuela, and why was that particular goal adopted by the brain trust members? So I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much for the possibility of this encounter with my other colleagues of other countries and to interchange the experience in Venezuela. For us, and we were created by IFIT in 2016. Since the beginning, the main goal, the overarching goal has been to lead in some way, contribute in some way for a way out of Venezuela through a peaceful, negotiated solution. This has been a goal very difficult to achieve in Venezuela. We have not been able to achieve it, but the idea since the beginning was how to approach this, overcoming political polarization that has been very acute, and it still is, among the political actors, overcome that zero-sum game that they have, and the perception of the other as an enemy, So those things we have been working on those things to do different initiatives, different encounters and opening spaces with different actors. And I think we have not reached a negotiation solution that is successful in Venezuela, but I think we are not where we were in 2016.
Thank you, Margarita. And indeed, I mean, you touch on the complexity of change in a place like Venezuela, with lots of structural challenges. And I guess one of the things I wanted to also ask about is, I mean, Venezuela is extremely difficult for someone on the outside to understand. But what has been your experience about, any benefits from the diversity of the membership of your brain trust in terms of your own understanding, even if you're living and working as a Venezuelan in the country, how, if at all, has this sort of diversity of the brain trust membership help you in understanding the complexity of your own country and in developing creative ideas to address the negotiated solution goal that you described?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think the big strength of the brain trust is that diversity of the members that constitute the group, because they come from different ways of life and different disciplines, academic disciplines. And in the case of Venezuela, also different, we have academia, we have politicians, and more recently, we have civil society members too. And so when we have this space, all of us to see each other, to interchange ideas, we find that we are looking at the same problems from very different dimensions. And so this enriches our perspective. I am a historian, I'm a political analyst, but I have to come, and sometimes I clash with political actors, and sometimes civil society members clash with political actors too. But from that, and through the years, we have developed spaces of tolerance, plurality, I would say, and that has enriched also. We have because we work on the ground, we have a much more wide idea of the diagnosis of the complexity of Venezuela society. And from there, I would say pops up innovations, ideas that have been nurturing politicians and that sit on negotiation tables in Venezuela. I think that we have been very, we have very positive impacts in the agendas, in the last agendas of the actors that have been sitting in negotiation tables in Venezuela.
That's really that's great to hear, and I guess maybe just if you've given a couple of examples already, but as you mentioned, I mean, the Venezuelan Brain Trust has been operating for almost 6 years now, with a deliberately low profile, of course, in light of the very sensitive and complex nature of the work and the polarization that you also referred to, Margarita. And so just wanted to invite you, if you'd like to just share any other story or example of an idea or an action initiated by the Venezuelan Brain Trust that has had an impact or is having an impact on the ground, notwithstanding the long-term goal of negotiated solutions still being a work in progress.
Yes. Yeah, maybe I mentioned too, one that has already popped up here, that is the idea of that the only way out of Venezuela is a negotiation solution. I mean, this was not easy. I think because of the composition of the Brain Trust, we had the capacity to stand forwards in this idea, because in Venezuela it was like, for many actors, inconceivable that with such a harsh dictatorship, you can negotiate anything. I mean, it's a cruel regime. It's a very authoritarian regime. And so for the political actors that went to the negotiation table, what they wanted was to enough pressure inside by mobilization, outside by the international community, so that the regime had to step down and call elections. Or we have even seen coup d'etat, intense failed coup d'etats, and all kinds of conspiracies. And to talk about a negotiated solution was almost stigmatized when we started this. And today, that's not the case. Today, there are many actors that are convinced that the solution in Venezuela is a negotiated solution, and that a peaceful way, and that kind of solution is the only way we are going to get to the door of democratization, which is the big aspiration of Venezuelan society. The second impact, we could talk about many things. I think that we're not near to our goal, but we have been working on the field to sow that field so that when it happens, things are there. Is of course the book with big effort that was written 3 years ago. It took us about a year to do each essay. That its purpose was to deepen a diagnosis about the key actors in a possible peaceful solution for Venezuela, and topics, of course, the economy, the oil economy, the military, the political system, what I call the civil and uncivil society. These are chapters of this book that go not only to the diagnosis, to a deep diagnosis to characterize these topics and actors, but also from there to bring out what can be done to alter, to modify their behaviors and reforms, policies that could bring us to a more rich agenda that would know what comes first and what comes second in the path towards that peaceful solution to overcome the acute global crisis that Venezuela has been suffering for so long.
Thank you so much, Margarita. And you've given lots of, I think, examples. And of course, we can't describe 6 years of work in 6 minutes, but I think you've given some very relevant examples that I appreciate. Let me switch now to you, Chom. So Chom, you're with us in Abuja now, and in the Middle Belt. This is the Brain Trust you're part of course, is not a national or nationwide brain trust, but it's concentrated in the Middle Belt. And so I want to just invite you to just describe very briefly, what is the strategic focus or goal of the Middle Belt Brain Trust, and why was that particular goal adopted by the members of the Brain Trust?
The Brain Trust in Nigeria was established in 2018, 4 years ago. and it's made up of 15 members, coming both from the retired military professors to some of us who are on the ground practicing peace building and conflict transformation. So it has grown into a new model because in the Middle Belt and in Nigeria generally, the tendency has been for those undertaking peace building to be doing mostly focusing on communities, on small groups, doing little things here and there that are not really effective. And the elite are not involved. The government is not involved. And we know that the conflict, particularly in Nigeria, because of its federal nature, its diversity, there are a lot of structural challenges that needs to be addressed at a higher policy level. And if you continue just to deal with people who are not at that level, it means that you are not really hitting the target. I mean, even if you get communities to begin to collaborate, it takes time. After a short time, the collaboration breaks up. And so our main target was, can we bring a new model that is going to not just deal with low-level community actors, but also bring in government and bring in policymakers so that the changes will be more transformational if it is achieved. So that has been, and we have been working, we're in the Middle Belt because the Middle Belt has been like for a long time, for the past 20-something years, has seen a lot of conflict, herder-farmer conflicts, kidnapping has come in, banditry, and then of course the terrorism in the north is also permeating into the Middle Belt. And then, so the complexity of the Middle Belt is that is where we say the north and the northern Islamic north and the Christian south meets, and is therefore a highly contentious area. And so our thinking has been, if you can build an organization and a platform that is able to deal with some of the conflict that I imagine, then you can make the Middle Belt maybe the peace center of Nigeria, a place that can really help to douse the tensions and bring new approaches to responding to conflict.
Thank you so much, Chom. And I mean, you've characterized this goal in very large terms, and I guess the reason you've given is, you know, that what's needed is a more systemic, less ad hoc approach, a more long-term vision, not short-term gains, but really develop, as you said, sort of a framework or a paradigm that can endure and maybe turn the Middle Belt into a leading example of peace building. Let me ask in that context the same question I asked Margarita about your experience of being a member of the Middle Belt Brain Trust, in the sense that you have your own understanding of the Middle Belt, you have your own expertise, but you're part of this group that's very multi-sectoral, very multidisciplinary. Has that been helpful in your understanding of just how complex the Middle Belt is, and also in the development of your vision for the Middle Belt and peace in the Middle Belt? How important is that multidisciplinary composition in your experience so far?
Okay, you know, I've been working on conflict, on peace building for like 20 years, and mostly has been community focused, locally focused. And well, we get the program and we implement it. But this time is no more an idea of getting a program, get money, and then you start implementing in different small communities. This time it is, you develop the program, you develop the vision. What do you want to really achieve? And we have like 5 states we are working in. They are quite different. Each one is different. And luckily we have people from those states. And sharing the experience. There are those I know, there are many I don't. There are perspectives I thought I knew, but working with, for example, Fulani you know. I mean, they are intellectuals, but they work with the headers, which I don't do. So the perspective is very, very rich, both intellectually and in practice. We are also begin to share different approaches. What the way, how do you deal with government? Government are recalcitrant, they have refused to be involved, but we are now saying, how do you get them interested?
Yeah.
I've never worked for government, so we needed people who really understood that sector to be able to say, look, this is the way to approach them, and these are the kind of issues they would be interested in.
Well, thank you so much, Chom. The time for our event, it goes so quickly that it's hard to give you more time. Unfortunately, we're going to move to Sawsan, but I did want to mention, just for the participants who are listening, the strategic choice also of a pilot state to test your model, which I know you didn't have time to mention, but I think is also part of the innovation that the Middle Belt Brain Trust developed, to not try and do it all at once, but test your ideas, refine them through consultations and engagement in a pilot state of the Middle Belt. So thank you so much. I'm going to move now to Sawsan, and Sawsan, welcome. Sawsan, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a member of our Syria resource group, the Brain Trust for Syria. And so Sawsan, I guess, same initial question to you. What is the overarching strategic goal of the Syrian Brain Trust, and why was that particular goal adopted by the Brain Trust members?
Thanks, Mark. So in the Syria Resource Group, we're trying to promote a Syrian-led solutions to shape rather than just react to the policy, international aid policies to Syria. So we're in particular working on the issue of future recovery and reconstruction and the international financing of it. We're trying to develop an operational framework that's built on a human rights-based conditionality to help international actors design principled policies to international aid to Syria. And that's because, unfortunately, in the past decade, international aid has been a part of the conflict dynamics in Syria in terms of contributing to human rights violations, entrenching existing divisions in the country, being part of the conflict economy in general, empowering warlords in certain cases. So we wanted to develop this operational framework that can guide future interventions in a principled way that respects the human rights in the country and maintains the ownership for the Syrians rather than for the government, the current government, or the other de facto authorities in the country.
Great, thank you. So again, a very big picture goal, a very large goal, which of course matches the complexity of Syria, a country of, again, really unusual complexity. So same question to you, Sawsan. I mean, you know, you're a member of the Syria resource group, which has a very diverse composition, people from different sectors. You have this common strategic goal, but I mean, it's so difficult to understand Syria from the outside. But what about, you know, for you, even as a Syrian, has it been helpful to your understanding of Syria to be part of this multi-sector, multi-disciplinary brain trust, and also for the ideas that you're developing? Is it an important element of the ideas that you develop?
Well, indeed, we have a huge wealth of technical expertise. We have economists, politicians, architects, doctors, experts in health, leaders in the civil society scene and in the private sector scene. But we also come with a lot of connections to Syrian communities inside the country, to Syrians in the diaspora and in the refugee communities, to policymakers on a very senior level, and also to international experts and other international influential actors. And then all of that was coupled with the huge resources and expertise and networks and connections that IFIT brought to us, either through the thematic practice groups or also through your direct contacts and connections. And I think this has allowed us to transform our individual assets into one pool of collective assets. And that was very helpful, not just to help us diagnose the issues in Syria in a more comprehensive way, but to actually be very ambitious in proposing solutions to address these challenges and to challenge very entrenched systems, international frameworks, because through this expertise, we could actually propose actionable solutions, and we could use the networks to have the right conversations with the right people in safe environments where everyone can contribute to the solution as peer-to-peer, not in a contested environment, as unfortunately most local international conversations usually happen in a defensive mode rather than in a collaborative mode.
No, that's great, Sawsan. And so maybe just one last question, if I may, just if you just have any brief example or story that you might share about what you, again, I think very importantly, talk about. I mean, this is a panel about a model of locally led peace building. And you were saying, the Syrian Resource Group is trying to develop and promote frameworks and ideas that are Syrian led ideas of the widest possible sort of Syrian perspectives. And so, I mean, is there an example that you might share in a minute or less with us?
I think very quickly I can refer to the dialogue convening that the Syria Resource Group not just initiated. Well, actually what we did is that we mobilized a large number of influential Syrian actors, and together we convened this day of dialogue in the run-up to the infamous Brussels conference. That's the most effective bridging event for Syria, in which all donor countries come together. Now, what we wanted to do is to reverse the dynamic, because usually Syrians are reduced to voices who can be, in the best case scenario, consulted on what the issue is, but never on how to address the solution. So what we did is, again, we leveraged our collective resources, and in a very, very short time frame, we put together this one-day dialogue event, 6 panel discussions featuring Syrian experts in conversations with international policymakers on the most senior level. And we discussed some of the most challenging components of the current frameworks and current architecture for international aid to Syria. And I think I look at this as a successful example of the work of Syria Resource Group for two reasons. A, because it was actually a statement to reverse the power dynamic and to put a precedent on how a partnership, international local partnership, should be done in the future. And because it also resulted in multiple follow-up conversations, practical conversations with the international decision makers to advance the thinking on these solutions. Again, they are not easy. No one has the final answer to it, but together we are managing to make progress in proposing these solutions. The other thing is that for the Syrians who were involved in this, it was also a huge step, because it reignited the sense of we can work together and we can actually make a difference. And that's very important, because it can actually, I do believe in cumulative change and in the very tiny steps that eventually can make a big difference. And such initiatives prove that for us as Syrians, that together we can again put efforts together to work, but also because we could see that it's at least widening the room of maneuver that we have today in our relations and conversations with the international actors.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. Great note to end on. Thank you so much, Sawsan, Chom, Margarita, for being with us today, sharing your reflections. Again, it's just, when I think that each of your brain trusts is somewhere between 4 and 6 years old, And I would say also just the sophistication with which, you're approaching this work, the systemic kind of approach that Chom is describing, the locally led approach that you're all describing, frameworks, the important, the way that you, again, through this sort of collective knowledge, this collective effort, are able to move the conversation or introduce frameworks that can be really critical, again, over a long term. I think it's very admirable, and especially knowing the complexity of the environments that each of you is living and working in. So thank you so much. Thank you also to all of those who joined us today. And please also join us for our next session, which will be announced in the next few weeks. And that will be about a different kind of innovation, which has to do with an initiative we have on apex court appointments. There'll be more details about that soon. Thank you again, everyone, and have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. Thank you so much.